So reports emerging from eSwatini in the last 24 hours that dozens of school children have either been shot or arrested by government forces in the latest sign of political crisis in the country. We've covered the story for months now. People in eSwatini calling for King Mswati to relinquish power over the state and for more democratic rule to take hold in the country. The king had promised that there'd be some form of dialogue to work towards that process. But what then to make of these latest developments in the last day or so? Let's speak to Mahle Maseko. He represents the Swaziland National Union of Students. He's currently in South Africa. Mahle, we're grateful for your time on Newzroom Afrika tonight. So when we spoke to the Teachers Association earlier, they said dozens of children, or school pupils, I should say, have either been shot or arrested. What do you know about the numbers of people affected?
Well, good evening to you and good evening to our viewers. Okay, for now, our sources are still trying to gather the reliable information on that kind of issue in terms of empirical evidence on how many students have been shot and how many students have been injured or arrested. So I guess it's something that we will confirm later. But for now, what I can say is that indeed the environment on the ground is very hostile.
Mm-hmm.
It is very savage, and it is very difficult for students to acquire knowledge, to acquire or maybe to be given the right for education because of the political situation going on.
So schools in eSwatini had been closed, right, and reopened, if memory serves well, quite recently. How much schooling has actually gone on given these recent developments?
Okay, the conditions, to the sense that students, especially high school students, have been trying to demand on the government. Not even a single of their demands have been met by the current sitting government. So other students decided to continue being resolute and say, you know what, we are standing for our rights, and we will continue to engage in protest, and therefore that's the reason why you find other schools have been closed, and students do understand very well that the state has been trying to use systematic ways, in capturing students whom they suspect to have been the ones that decided to start the recent protest. Because once you open schools, the students will come to school, and engage in classroom activities or educational activities. Then that's where the state, you'll find, they will get that chance in picking up or maybe capturing those students who are being suspected of being the ones who are starting the protest on virus schools. Yes.
The Teachers Association, when we spoke to them about 2 hours ago, told us that they believe, and you're still trying to confirm the exact figure as well, they believe that the number of school pupils who've either been detained or shot is somewhere in the region of 38. What was going on when security forces either detained or opened fire on these students? Was it during a protest?
Oh yes. It was, a week ago, the government decided to open schools, and when they decided to open school, students were supposed to get school. So at some point we had evidence that the police, in fact, the real security forces, occupied schools, militarized schools, and decided to find some students who are being suspected of these ongoing protests, and which is why some of them have now fled the country. They have fled the country. Others have been denied the right for education. Others have been arrested as well. So the conducive, the environment, as a matter of respecting the fundamental rights and freedoms of minors or maybe high school students has been deprived, has been violated in one way or another. So these are the reasons why such situations are happening in our country.
And Mahle, you're speaking to us tonight from South Africa. Will you go back home to eSwatini? Do you feel safe as a student leader in eSwatini?
Of course I do. I'll go back home. I'll go back home. There's no there may be a reason for me not to go. I'll just go home. I've been here for some certain involvement. It's not that kind of situation. But all I can say is that students will remain resolute. They know what they want, because in fact, if you didn't know, students do understand very well that, especially young people, do understand very well that this is the age of enlightenment for Swazi students, or maybe Swazi young generation. And that's why you will find that they've decided to say, you know what, we are the ones who will determine the future, our future. So, which is for that reason why we are saying this protest will continue if the government decide to neglect the demands that are required. Maybe those demands are being addressed.
And Mahle, let's talk about those demands. Excuse me for speaking over you there. I think there's a slight delay in our connection. But tell us more about the demands from the students' perspective. What do you, as the young people of eSwatini, want to see change?
Well, from the student perspective, our principles as a student organization, which is NAS, as well as student movements, is to say democracy is the first issue. It is the first principle that needs to be implemented in our country for a relevant education. Because we have realized that the current scholarship policy that is implemented by the current conservative government has been somehow it has been very discriminative, to the sense where we see most students are not getting scholarships. Some of them, they are not getting scholarships. It is not inclusive. So these are the reasons why we are saying the conditions at large are not conducive enough for students to pursue academic freedom and acquire knowledge, to liberate their gifts, and even to develop communities, their communities and nation at large. So those kind of conditions are the ones that forces students to say, you know what, let's engage in protest, let's continue to call for democratic reforms, and in order for us to liberate, or maybe to acquire those liberties, just like what our counterparts in South Africa, have right now. So we wish to see a very easy, accessible, in fact, an accessible scholarship that will be inclusive to every Swazi citizen that wishes to pursue in educational purposes. And we also want to see academic excellence pursuing, because right now, as we talk, the education system is has been suppressed somehow, because young children are protesting from the elementary level up to the higher institution. It has been deprived. Once they finish that school, maybe their certificate at maybe 5, you find that they are not employed. Why? Because the relevance of the education is no longer there. It is irrelevant to the kind of education system. And that's where you find the high rates of unemployment manifesting in our society.
So is the path, by your assessment, to negotiations towards the democratic reforms that are being demanded overall in eSwatini, is that path still open? Because 2 months ago, when many of us caught on to the story, the king and the government were saying, well, they were open to dialogue. It would have to happen within the Isibaya format or the platform. But the activists were saying, well, that's not a neutral platform, and therefore they cannot go there to speak with the government. Now, given the detention and alleged shooting of school pupils by the government, is that channel for dialogue still open?
Well, on the student perspective and with our tools of analysis, I believe that part of traditionalism approach, in pursuing a dialogue is somehow irrelevant. Somehow it doesn't make sense in most people, because they do understand very well, the background information about that kind of traditional approach, which is the Sibaya, has not played any positive significance, in addressing national issues. Over the past years, we've seen the head of state calling the whole students, or maybe should I say the whole nation, to that kind of dialogue, or should I say monologue, because it is no longer a dialogue. And all those issues that have been submitted on that engagement, not even a single one has not addressed.
Right.
So we do not believe on such a kind of approach.
Okay.
We still stand that we need an all-inclusive dialogue that will be of higher standards and be recognized by the international community to say this is the kind of dialogue that will solve the issues in Swaziland for a future, or maybe a better future for Swaziland.
Mahle Maseko from the Swaziland National Union of Students, good to speak to you. Thank you for your time tonight, sir.